But it's not going to happen overnight. And so there's a vision to get this done over several years. Over these next few years, we can do it. And when we do it, we're saving taxpayer money.
In tonight's 360 coverage, today was the final day of the Western Governors Conference. Our team sat down with Pete Buttigieg, U.S. Secretary of Transportation, about the future of transportation, particularly in rural communities. White House recently started implementing a nearly $8 billion plan to bring 500,000 new EV charging stations across the country, hopefully opening new opportunities for drivers to switch to electric. But it's a long haul. KHQ's Bradley Warren spoke with Secretary Buttigieg about why the government is pushing so hard to get this done.
Yeah, hey Sean, good evening. Well, I spent the last couple of days talking with secretaries, and tonight we have the big one, Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Now, normally the Secretary of Transportation probably wouldn't make such major headlines, but the reason he's making such major headlines is because of that massive bipartisan infrastructure package that's moved through Congress. Now, the Secretary is tasked with roads and bridges, right? But right now, he's also tasked with helping you at home go green.
We have nothing else. There's no planet B, as I've heard over and over.
Vicki Barnes is a Tesla driver.
Humans are we're not doing a good job of taking care of what we've got.
She feels in her small way.
So you plug it in.
Driving this Tesla will make a difference.
When the electric cars came out, I was all over it. Prior to this, I'd had hybrids, and so I went full electric. I haven't looked back, and I won't.
But there's one small problem, and that's finding a charging station. Occasionally, it can be difficult.
If you're going along I-90, you're good. If you go anywhere off of that, north and south, you're going to run into trouble.
So we took that concern about superchargers and EV charging stations in general to Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg and asked if any solutions were on the way for the people of Eastern Washington and North Idaho.
So right now, we are deploying the first wave of what will ultimately be $7.5 billion to help get more EV chargers across the country. The president's vision is by the end of this decade, we'll have 500,000 chargers.
A major push of the Biden administration is to get the federal fleet off fossil fuels.
President,
this sucker's quick.
How's it drive?
A goal that he hopes to have accomplished in the next several years.
Well, we're already underway. I mean, even for me in Washington now, one of the vehicles that I get around D.C. in is now all electric. We're saving taxpayer money. One of my favorite things from when we took delivery on the car that's part of how I get around is I noticed that it came with a gas card, as every officially issued federal car does. But we're never going to have to use that gas card, and taxpayers are never going to have to pay for that gas.
As for right now here in Spokane, Vicki says she looks forward to never paying for gas again.
We spent under $100. We went from Spokane to Cannon Beach and back, and we had to stop several times and charge, and I think it was under $100.
Less than gas.
Absolutely, especially lately.
Absolutely less than gas. That is correct. So my conversation with the secretary, quite lengthy. I'm in the process of posting the full interview right now onto our website. The secretary told me that his goal is to help everyone get easier access to transportation. That's why we spoke specifically about the EV chargers. He wants to help people use those and have access to them. But he also says that there's a major push right now from the White House to put more money into small commuter airports like the Spokane Airport and the Pullman Airport. If you'd like to hear more from my interview with the secretary, that's available on KHQ.com.
Montana reached out to me to bring to your attention has to do with the Big Sky rail system. And they lost that back in the 70s, and that was a route that went Billings down, picked up the major metro areas through Missoula into Spokane. Now it goes up on the High Line, so it misses all of the population and goes through Great Falls into Spokane. So if you live in Billings, you've got to drive 9 hours to take a train. And it's not easy to get there. It's not a direct route. Sure. There's hope that this project might be able to take off again. Where do you stand on that? Is there any ability for Amtrak to expand?
Potentially. Look, this is the best time for passenger rail in my lifetime because we're investing in it more right now under President Biden than any time since Amtrak was first created 50 years ago. What that means is this is a great opportunity for communities, and states to make their voices heard and to apply to be part of the plans that are being laid out. Right now, we are taking input for a corridor identification program. Basically, being on that program is a first step toward getting funding that can help either expand or improve passenger rail routes. Our view, and the president is, of course, famously a big believer in passenger rail, so am I. Our view is that American citizens ought to have as good or better quality passenger rail in terms of service, reliability, and availability as anywhere else in the world. Right now, we know that's not true, but it should be.
I also think another kind of bow tie to that is the Spokane to Seattle element that's suffered for many years. To catch the train out of Spokane, you've got to get it at 3 a.m. There's hope for improvement on that front too. So basically going Billings to Seattle, improvement could happen.
So right now what we're looking at is how to have better on-time performance and manageable schedules that agree with people's needs. The issue tends to come from the fact that the passenger rail, Amtrak, is on rails that are owned by freight rail companies. But those freight rail companies have a responsibility to be good hosts. It's a legal responsibility, and we're working with the Surface Transportation Board to enforce that. The first step has been collecting data on how much of the on-time performance issues and schedule issues are actually the result of the freight trains being in the way. Now that we're getting more of that data, we're going to strongly support holding those rail companies accountable for allowing passenger travel to move smoothly and for coexisting effectively on the same rails.
So on the job creation side, would that fall under the infrastructure package if this were to be expanded, or would we just use the existing rail if you were to pivot down Billings through Seattle?
So it depends, and it could even be both. Look, there is enough funding here to both extend and add routes that don't exist and to improve routes that do exist. We're always going to wish that there was more, but there's more than we've had in a long time. So it's a great time to hear about proposals from around the country and from here in the West.
So you would encourage that organization to get a proposal in?
It would certainly be the right time to try to get in for our corridor identification program.
I'm sure you're aware there was a massive flood that moved through Montana and took out basically all the roads accessing Yellowstone National Park. How's your department been involved in the rehab of that?
So we've been directly engaged with both the park itself and the federal lands management there and the surrounding states. Upwards of $70 million of emergency relief funds, which allows us to take highway money and use it to help make sure that roads are back up and running quickly. We know how important these roads are to, not just to the park, of course, but to the surrounding communities, and have really valued the cooperation with the states across state lines, across party lines, across federal, state, jurisdictional boundaries, just to get those dollars to where they're needed and get those roads back up and running.
So I interviewed Governor Greg Gianforte shortly after the flood happened, and he said the way the road actually goes from Mammoth into the park probably can't sit on the existing area because it washed away, and they might have to move it to a new place. Is that something that's being discussed? I mean, the north interest is still what's heavily affected, and it's Gardner and then Paradise Valley, that area that's going, we don't have any tourism money coming in, they thrive off that. That's where they get all the money for the year. Is there any hope that you can give that either by the end of September or the start of next season, those roads will be accessible again?
So I can't speak to all of the engineering details that are being worked out right now, but I will say this. There's two different things going on. One is emergency funding to make sure roads can be operational as they once were. But another thing we've got to do is recognize that we should build and design our roads for a future that's not going to look like the past. Look, the simple truth is we're going to have more extreme weather events. So if a road is getting washed out and we fix it, and then the exact same thing happens the next year and we fix it again, that could be a sign that we need to build and design in a better way. And we are about to roll out federal funding that's going to help communities do exactly that. Not just to repair the damage from extreme weather, but to be more resilient against floods, against fires, against any of the things that are happening more and more, especially in the West.